Recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you for yielding. Mr. Speaker, after 4 days and 15 rounds of the new Republican majority has finally chosen a speaker, and their first order of business is to trample on the hopes of the people that elected them. The rules package that we see before us contains no less than 3 bills that strip people in this country of their reproductive freedom. These bills are a slap in the face to voters who proved time and time again at the polls last year that they believe in reproductive freedom and abortion access. From Kentucky to Kansas to my home state of California, our constituents believe that the right to make decisions about their life and their health, including abortion, lies with them, not with you, not with me, not with any elected official. This rules package is meant to help this body govern, not restrict the personal autonomy of millions. As one who has had an abortion, I know how horrific this rule package is. It's our bodies, it's our choices. Mr. Speaker, this dysfunction and hypocrisy is shameful, and the people deserve
recognition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week, one of our colleagues from across the aisle made very ignorant comments that questioned Representative Judy Chu's loyalty and service to this country. These claims were baseless, discriminatory, and flat out wrong. As one of his own Republican colleagues said, these types of troubling comments are out of bounds and, yes, beyond the pale. Questioning Congresswoman Judy Chu's loyalty to the United States purely based on her Chinese heritage is not only racist and xenophobic, it's very dangerous. And it's not new. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was subject to baseless accusations of being a communist by J. Edgar Hoover. These same harmful bouts of hateful misinformation have been cast toward myself, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and other women of color in Congress. It's despicable. Madam Speaker, hate speech leads to hate violence. We must clearly and strongly denounce this kind of rhetoric, especially during a time when our AAPI community continues to be a target of hateful aggression against the country. Congresswoman Chu has been a steadfast warrior for constituents in her district, the AAPI community. She's a great patriot, and for all marginalized communities she's worked for across our country. To question her service and loyalty to the United States, it's shameful and unacceptable.
So thank you again, Mr. Secretary. With that, I want to recognize the distinguished ranking member, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, for her opening statements. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'd like to add my welcome to you, Mr. Secretary, and I want to thank you for your testimony regarding the President's proposed fiscal 2024 budget request for State Department, Foreign Operations and related programs. Secretary Blinken, first of all, your travel and your energy are truly inspirational. We appreciate the active and robust diplomacy on the part of the United States, and there is no doubt that it is sorely needed with the challenges that we faced on just about every continent, and I too want to salute and thank all of the employees of the Department of State. You know, we do have 3 legs of our national security policy: development, diplomacy, and defense. And certainly the 2 that you are shepherding has been amazing in the last few years, but also we need to have more resources in development and diplomacy. You're showing how diplomacy works. The work done by this administration, in large part to you, thanks to you and the State Department, has kept a global coalition together in support of Ukraine and the condemnation of Russian aggression. This diplomacy increases the chance of us getting to a lasting and peaceful resolution. The past year, we have seen a truce in Ethiopia hold beyond expectations. U.S.-led efforts with partners around the world to respond to massive natural disasters and food security crises and new global leadership breakthroughs, such as the new malaria vaccine, getting ready to roll out. Great accomplishment. These achievements have not been possible without the active United States and its leadership. But meeting these challenges requires the United States to have the presence, the tools, and resources to show up, engage in dialogue and consensus building, and hold everyone, including ourselves, accountable for hard-fought commitments. It is this primacy of our diplomacy and development work to both the United States' strategic interests as well as global peace and stability that makes me so concerned about the cuts being considered by the new Republican majority for fiscal 2024. The administration's request recognizes the need for the United States to engage in every fora, especially where those that do not share our values are present. A cut in resources will exacerbate vaccines development, stunt efforts to build a skilled and, yes, diverse staff, and this does not mean the definition that's used about woke. We want the staff to reflect the population of the United States. And also, the budget undermines engagement at all levels, putting the United States on a back foot. Reductions would delay both physical and cybersecurity upgrades needed to keep the United States facilities and personnel safe and secure. And cuts would cripple United States efforts to invest in sustainable development goals, the framework agreed by every single country to tackle shared challenges like gender inequality, extreme hunger and poverty, and threats to public health. I hope that you will discuss this administration's ongoing approach to building partnerships in sub-Saharan Africa, where, of course, the last administration called these countries S-hole countries, and the Caribbean, both of which represent untapped potential for U.S. engagement. My colleagues are often quick to focus on the influence of the People's Republic of China. I will point out that China has now more embassies and more diplomats around the world than the United States does. Simply, we are being outmanned and outwomaned since countries recently are clamoring for greater partnerships with the United States. So we've got to figure out a strategy to close this gap. Another area that we can't afford to fall back on is global health. United States leadership and investment has helped millions to survive and thrive, but these gains are fragile. The world is organizing to make sure we are better prepared to detect and respond to the next disease outbreak. Cuts to global health funding will prove short-sighted the next time a pandemic from abroad comes to our shores. The COVID pandemic cost trillions of dollars in global economic output. We cannot afford to put preparedness on the back burner again. And last but not least, we must get on track to deal with the existential challenge of climate change. I joined the most recent Conference of Parties, or COP, in Egypt last October, as you were there also, and many of our colleagues, which is the largest gathering of policymakers, experts, and activists on climate annually. Every person I came across emphasized the need for United States leadership and their frustration that resources and action have not matched our rhetoric. The people suffering from most extreme weather, changing climate patterns, and the loss of biodiversity are those who had the smallest role in causing these changes. Decades of investment in agriculture, health, and infrastructure are being wiped out by these new climate trends. Countries are slowly being swallowed by the sea. My constituents in California certainly understand. And I expect those suffering from hurricanes in Florida, drought in the Southwest, or flooding in the Midwest do also. The United States has a moral responsibility and a self-interest to address the drivers of these changes and the effects of the most vulnerable. We need to do much more on climate change, not less. Mr. Secretary, it's evident the administration has worked very hard over the past 2 years to restore America's global reputation and promote engagement and dialogue with international organizations and partners. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle bring some distinct priorities, but I believe we all end at the same conclusion. Active United States leadership and engagement leads to better outcomes for both our country and, I hope we would agree, the rest of the world. A more stable, peaceful, democratic, and prosperous world depends on an active and engaged United States. A robust and growing international affairs budget is desperately needed to achieve this. And so I want to thank you again for your tireless work on behalf of our country and for being with our subcommittee today, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just make a comment with regard to taxpayer dollars and accountability. Just for the record, I want to remind you that the Pentagon has failed 5 audits And the waste, fraud, and abuse in the defense budget is rampant. And at some point, we've got to get that under control. And taxpayers need to know that the is the only agency, the Pentagon, the Defense Department, in history that has failed 5 audits and that has never passed an audit. That's as FYI for the record. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned PEPFAR. It's been really a bright spot of bipartisan support. However, probably 20 to 25% of the members serving today were serving in the early 2000s when we worked together to authorize PEPFAR, which has saved at least 20 million lives. And this is something every member of Congress and every American should know and be proud of. So from the State Department's perspective, why is reauthorization of this flagship program should continue, and why do we need to continue it with bipartisan support? And secondly, many PEPFAR-focused countries, well, several, have reached epidemic levels. What would a reduction of resources for the program mean this close to the 2030 goal of global epidemic control? Because we still are on track to end the AIDS pandemic by 2030.
And I think you put your finger on it. The simple truth is that for the extraordinary number of lives saved and changed, the job is not yet done. And we have the very real possibility of eradicating this epidemic by 2030, but that requires continuing the program. And we've seen in some places some of the dramatic progress actually slow, if not halt. So if we take our foot off the accelerator over the next 7 or so years, I think there's a real danger that we risk losing some of the gains that we've made. So we have to see this through. I just took part in by video in an event that former President Bush had to celebrate the 25 years. I think that's hugely important because it does remind people, or actually informs people, to your point, of what an achievement this has been on a strong bipartisan basis. And it's a huge credit. One other element. You know this better than I do. Wherever I travel, in Africa in particular, the thanks, appreciation, gratitude that we get for the PEPFAR program is extraordinary. And that, frankly, helps our diplomacy. It strengthens our standing in country after country. On a human level, when I get to hear from people who have benefited from the program, it touches me deeply. But geopolitically, this is at a time when, again, we're in competition with China and others for influence. This is one of the programs that has made a huge difference. Were we to undercut it or underfund it, I think that would actually have geopolitical consequences, not just global health consequences.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Do I have another minute, or how are we doing this?
I'm not going to tell you no. But
Well, this will
it'll
be
brief.
very brief. With regard to, I already made my statement about the misuse of taxpayer dollars. So this next question has to do with Haiti, your assessment of the situation in Haiti, and how can the United States best assist the people of Haiti in forging a process to establish a new government that's broadly representative of Haitian society, and how are we dealing with the gang issues in Haiti? I'm glad to see the president meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau.
I don't want to sugarcoat this, and Chairman and I have actually discussed this as well. This is a daunting challenge, and we have interconnected problems, many of which, of course, have built up over the years and over the decades that we have to grapple with. We need a political way forward that actually gets Haiti to elections so that there can be a clearly legitimate government. Our diplomats are working day in, day out to try to bring the different stakeholders together, to include the government, the Montana Group, and others, to see if they agree. But I have to tell you, and again, you know this so well, given the profound insecurity, that's the single biggest challenge we face right now is insecurity. And we have a country that in critical places is simply dominated by gangs. The state does not have control over security. And there's a nexus between gangs and various elites, political elites, economic elites, that we've been trying to break, because many of these gangs are funded and directed by individuals for whom it's in their interest to have gangs doing their bidding. So we have directly targeted a number of those individuals, including many who enjoy coming to the United States, to make it clear that if they continue to support gangs, that's not going to happen. So we need to break that. And then we need to, as we've been doing, support the Haitian National Police in trying to build up their capacity, not just equipment, training, et cetera. There is, as you know, a very active discussion going on at the United Nations and beyond about whether there needs to be some kind of international force to bolster, probably a police-based force, to bolster the Haitian National Police and to provide greater security. It's a very active discussion. We're heading, in a few hours, heading to Canada with President Biden, and Canada's been one of the countries that's been in the lead of these discussions. We'll see where we get. But I also think that we all need to be thinking hard together about what is it we can do to be sustainably effective. We've been at this for years, for decades, and in so many ways, the Haitian people have been afflicted with so much that's beyond anyone's comprehension. But we have to, I think, come together to find ways to be confident that what we're pursuing can actually be effective in a sustainable way. And again, this is not easy given the long history and the challenges, but those are our areas of immediate focus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know you're interested in Haiti.
Yeah,
Also,
this is a conversation that we're going to have to continue long and hard.
Thank you very
Long and hard.
Mr. Good, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to the panel. First of all, let me just say to my colleagues, you all have a warped definition of woke. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines woke as aware of and actively attentive to important societal facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. In other words, it's basic decency. It means treating all Americans fairly, regardless of their skin color, background, religion, or gender identity. And I should know, because they actually quoted me in that definition of woke from a speech that I gave. And I said, but we will succeed if we reject the growing pressure to retreat into cynicism and hopelessness. We have a moral obligation to yes, stay woke, take a stand, and be active, challenging injustices and racism in our communities and fighting hatred and discrimination wherever it rises. So as an African American, your testimony, Ms. Augustine, scares me to death. Because you said, based on your definition of woke, that we won't have a country left. We won't have a country left. If in fact, we want a country that ensures equality for all. That's outrageous. That's what America stands for. Mr. Gupta, let me just ask you about the value of the federal government and the American taxpayer investing in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and how these investments lead to equal opportunity for everyone in this democracy where every American should have a shot to the American dream, where you know, and all of you know, that marginalized people in this country, people of color, poor people, don't have that path to the American dream.
Thank you, Representative Lee, for the question and your contributions to this discussion. And I appreciate you bringing up what I think should be a shared principle. Let's go back to the Declaration of Independence. At the time, they meant it in an exclusive way, but they wrote all men are created equal. If you believe that today, and you see that based on group identity and other lived experiences, these extraordinary disparities, for example, that a median white household has 8 or 9 times the wealth of a typical black household in this country. And if you believe that our systems are fair, then how could we see those outcomes, right? Does anyone here believe that merit varies by race, that ability varies by race? I don't think anyone here believes that. So what we know is, sometimes unintentionally, but sometimes very knowingly, we do have a lot of disparities by race. And educating people like my 6-year-old and my 10-year-old about this history, about just basic facts, actually helps bring them together. It actually helps them understand each other. It helps build a multiracial, vibrant democracy that will allow us to compete with other countries rising throughout the world, that will allow us to have the strength of everyone's talent and potential.
Thank you very much. And let me ask you very quickly about the Default on America Act in terms of the harm that this could wreak on the American people. In fact, let me just give you a couple of facts. In Speaker McCarthy's own district, mind you, these cuts would jeopardize Social Security payments for 75,000 people. That's in our Speaker's district, would risk the health benefits of 285,000 people in Speaker McCarthy's district. It would threaten the retirement savings of 89,000 people in Speaker McCarthy's district. And this is just 1 year impact of these cuts. Can you speak more on the long-term impact of these cuts?
Yes, I appreciate the question, Representative Lee. And I'll just add that this underscores that prioritization of debt service payments over everything else is still default. You're defaulting on the American people, on promises, on obligations that have been made to them, that they can count on right now, that they have been able to count on. So the consequences could be tremendous. In the long run, undermining our credit rating and the ability for the United States government to borrow as freely as it can right now. I just want to remind folks that there is no bank, there is no one telling us that we can't borrow. We're only telling ourselves that. In fact, people are readily willing and able to help us finance our investments because they know that the American economy has been so dynamic, so successful for so long, will continue to in the future. So this would simply be an own goal that would harm us potentially for decades to come.
Thank you. Just for the record, in my own state of California, not specifically Speaker McCarthy's district, which we just went through, which I just went through, the whole state of California, if in fact these budget cuts were enacted, we'd have 2.6 million people at risk of losing Medicaid coverage. We'd eliminate preschool and child care for at least 35,000 children and reduce access to outpatient care at Veterans Affairs medical facilities by approximately 2.3 million visits. So these are impacts on people's daily lives. These aren't just statistics. These are real everyday challenges that people are going to will have if in fact these cuts are enacted. So what are they going to do? How do you see their lives?
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Oh, okay, well, thank you, and I'll submit the question for the record.
Thank you.
Get a response. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Extreme MAGA Republicans have manufactured a crisis and are now extorting the American people with a terrible choice. Either they inflict cruel cuts that hurt everyday families, or they're forcing or trying to force a devastating default on our debt. They are gambling with working people's livelihoods and the global economy, driving us to the brink of economic catastrophe. And all because they'd rather have working people bear the burden of these terrible cuts instead of making billionaires and big corporations pay their fair share in taxes. Make no mistake, our constituents are watching, especially those in Speaker McCarthy's district, where 75,000 people would lose Social Security payments, 285,000 people's health care benefits would be at risk, and the retirement savings of 89,000 people would be in jeopardy, not to mention the number of veterans who lose their health care in Speaker McCarthy's district. Madam Speaker, from day one, Democrats have been the most responsible and the loudest voices in defending working families from Republicans' extreme behavior. We will continue to call out these games and hostage-taking. We must pay our bills.
I want to thank Congresswoman Lee. She's been a great partner in the House, no matter who's in charge and who's in the majority. She's been a wonderful partner to work with, particularly on women's issues or any issue where we want to reach across the aisle. One thing I want to press upon you all this morning is that nationwide we have a backlog of over 100,000 rape kits across this country. And what we want to do is compel state and local law enforcement to take inventory of the rape kits they have on their shelves, to take inventory of whether or not the results have been sent to CODIS so that we can track this information and finally get to moving and processing all these rape kits that have been sitting on shelves. And the other thing I want to impress on you this morning is that so many women, many of these rapes go unreported, but for the ones that do, there is very rarely a conviction. Some of it, the evidence might spoil. For other women, they're afraid to move forward. In one of my counties in my district, over a 10-year period from 2010 to 2020, we had 57 cases that were prosecuted, and only one conviction. And getting to the bottom of processing all of these rape kits across the country will bring justice to rape victims and women everywhere. And as Barbara Lee and I have both attested, both of us being victims of sexual assault and rape, the difficulty and challenges that women have to come forward. We just spoke about this earlier. It took me 25 years to finally tell my story and to be able to work with partners across the aisle to make a difference in women's lives, to know, for women to know that their voices are heard, that we are going to work hard to get this across the finish line. This bill will be in markup in judiciary tomorrow. And we want to make sure that women understand that their voices are going to be heard, actions are going to be taken, we're going to process these rape kits, get this backlog under control, and get states to be held accountable, and get them to take action and take it now. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Representative Lee.
Thank you very much, and good morning. First, let me just take a moment to thank Representative Mays for leading this bipartisan effort, but also for all of you being here today, because given what is taking place here in Congress, it's always a glimmer of hope for the public to really see Democrats and Republicans working together. And once again, we're working together on this very, very important issue. So thank you again. Violence against women, it's an epidemic. 1 out of every 5 women in the United States are victims of rape or attempted rape. Now, these numbers are even higher for women of color. Rape impacts a person for life. Sexual violence can have psychological, emotional, and physical effects on a survivor that impact their ability to work, to have relationships, and to live healthy and happy lives. The law says that rape is a severe offense. But while rape is formally prohibited, it's effectively, quite frankly, decriminalized. One out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 975 perpetrators will walk free. That's a fact. Only 310 will be reported to the police. Women don't report for many reasons, as Representative Mays knows. After an assault, they're often in shock, trauma sensitive, unable to process what happened to them. As one who has a background in mental health, psychiatric social work, I know this extremely well, what takes place psychologically as a result of rape. Society has conditioned us, yes, to blame ourselves. Representative Mace bravely, and I mentioned this earlier there, she shared her story in 2019, and I know it was difficult, but it took her decades to do so because of societal stigma and because of trauma. Women may also not report rape for fear of retaliation. Just look at how this country treated Dr. Ford when she came out with her assault story. Women that do report their assault and get to a hospital can get a rape kit. The police departments across the country are not fulfilling their obligation to test those kits and get justice for survivors. Hundreds of thousands of kits are sitting on shelves while we speak, while rapists go free and survivors are demoralized. The End the Rape Kit Backlog Progress Act would help ensure the voices of survivors are heard by strengthening state and local reporting requirements. My lived experiences drive me in the fight to end violence against women. In the 90s, yes, I wrote the California's Violence Against Women Act. California, yes, has come a long way, and I'm proud of our state for having reached 5 out of 6 of in the backlog's pillar of rape kit reform. But with 14,000 untested kits still on California's shelves, that's 14,000, we still have a long way to go. Again, violence against women is an epidemic, and I urge each one of my colleagues to support our bill, mandate reporting of rape kit backlogs across the nation, and help advance justice for millions. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Brain, who is our intergovernmental relations advocate and warrior woman.
Hello everyone, my name is Samantha Kadak. That's National Network. We are the largest anti-sexual violence organization in the nation, and we operate national service. The rape kit backlog has been an ongoing issue for decades. Just last year, a woman in Memphis, Tennessee was abducted and murdered while jogging by a man whose DNA was in a rape kit that went untested and nearly faded. States and local governments have a responsibility to test sexual assault kits. We are thankful for Representative Hunt and Lee for their dedication in addressing these issues, and we look forward to seeing the rape kit backlog progress passed in Congress. That being said, I have the pleasure of introducing Barbara Amaya. She is a survivor of child sex trafficking and from Paris.
How are you? Yes, as you just said, I am a survivor of human trafficking. I was 12. I was trafficked for over a decade in New York City. And technically each time an adult male sought to buy my young body, it was free. Unfortunately, my trafficker never ever permitted me to access a rape kit. But I do have a little story. It's crucial that states address the rape kit backlog so that victims can have their rape cases reviewed and addressed now, not later. There are hundreds of thousands of untested rape kits nationwide, and each represents a human being who has endured years of trauma and pain. We will not go ignored, and we will not be forgotten. We deserve some form of justice, and the Rape Kit Backlog Progress Act will help get us there. Thank you, Representative Hayes and Representative Bartley, for your leadership and for standing with survivors everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, and we have a few minutes where Barbara Lee and I can answer questions if anyone has any. Yes, sir, point this way.
So more specifically, how is the bill addressed
Well, they would lose their burn JAG funding if they don't do the mandated reporting part of it, and do that. You're at risk of losing that funding. So it is an incentive to get them to report their backlog and tell us also whether or not that information results have been reported to CODIS as well. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for holding this press conference. A two-parter. The first question is, can you speak a little bit more about the factors that led to this backlog and why police aren't processing these rape kits? And the second question is, could you talk a little bit about the feedback you've got from leadership in both parties on this bill?
Number one, I want to say Barbara Lee and I both have been strong advocates for women and for rape victims. The reason that this bill is coming forward is because we joined forces together. I knew and saw it as a state lawmaker, the backlog in the state of South Carolina. It's the same issues across the board sometimes. Sometimes it's resources, sometimes it's funding, those sorts of things. And so this is just one part of a larger wheel to get at how do we help solve this problem? How do we incentivize states and local law enforcement to move forward and do this across the country? And it needed to be the kind of bill. This is not a messaging bill. We worked on this for most of the year, almost 9 months. We wanted to create it in a way that would pass both chambers of bipartisan hearings like Campbell. So far, the first day it's got 27 co-sponsors. So we want it to move through. It'll get marked up tomorrow. So that is why we need leadership at the Republican conference and pushing the ball forward and moving that forward.
There's an added element to this. It's very similar to what happens when there are domestic violence situations and women are called police. Oftentimes, the police don't intervene or they treat it or whatever, and it's the same with this. And largely some of the police officers are, and so we have to understand that there's a dynamic there that allows for this to happen. That is
questions? Great. Thank you so much, y'all. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Pursuant to House Resolution 723, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment reduces the amount of funding allocated to USAID by $4.5 billion. As I've mentioned earlier, USAID is a vehicle through which the American taxpayer pays for economic development in other countries. I think instead we should spend more money on the economic development of our own country, and actually, if we spent less money overall, we probably would see less inflation, more prosperity, and the type of economic growth that we saw during President Trump's time in office. USAID may have started with laudable goals, but today they're promoting abortion globally with American tax dollars. They are pushing President Biden's national gender strategy. I never thought we needed a national gender strategy, but if we need a national gender strategy, can we at least not spend so much money promoting it abroad? Silly. The DEI programs that are embedded in the 1619 project have been embraced by United Nations Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and we see that continue to manifest through USAID. American taxpayers should focus their resources and their efforts on the American people and the American economy. This is a thoughtful reduction. It should be easily agreed to, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from I'm sorry, for what purpose does the gentlewoman seek recognition?
I rise in strong opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Once again, I have no idea what my colleagues are trying to achieve. All this amendment would do is double down on the harm Russia's aggression has already wreaked on the poorest countries of the world through higher food, fertilizer, and fuel costs. This amendment would cut $750 million each from global health programs and the international disaster assistance accounts. These cuts would impose tremendous harm and suffering to the most vulnerable, including 4 million children with malaria will go untreated, 350,000 deaths attributable to tuberculosis, 13 million fewer children vaccinated, resulting in a possible 115,000 additional deaths, and a reduction of over 45% of humanitarian assistance to Sudan compared to FY 2023 levels. This doesn't sound much like pro-life to me, Mr. Chairman. It would also eliminate entire development assistance accounts, affecting agriculture and food security programs, education, and clean water for millions of the most vulnerable people in the world. Development assistance is also used for counter-PRC influence programs, which represents one of our more effective tools to counter and compete with the PRC globally. It's really ridiculous, it's cruel, and it is not pro-life. These are not funds that would target to Ukraine in any significant way. It has no impact on the Ukraine debate and would inflict harm on millions of people. So I'd be happy to discuss with colleagues about how we support Ukraine's pursuit of freedom, but this amendment would only alienate the rest of the world and forsake many of our allies' reliant assistance on the United States. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
My amendment makes a $4.5 billion cut. $3.5 billion of that stops us from retiring global debt for Ukraine. Now, I don't think it's an unrealistic position to say that the United States of America should not deficit spend to retire the debt of other countries. Think about that. We are borrowing money from China to go settle the debts of Ukraine that they accrued far before this war with Russia. My colleague says that this exists to counter the PRC. We are never going to outbribe the PRC on the global scene. We are going to need another strategy. And if you listen to the debate of those opposing my amendment, Hear the substance. Oh my goodness. People around the world are having problems buying food and buying fuel. And if the U.S. taxpayer will just sacrifice a little more, it might be easier to buy food and fuel in other countries. I have a message for my Democratic colleagues. People are having a hard time buying food and fuel in this country as a consequence of the very inflationary spending that I am trying to reduce with this amendment. We should retire our debt before we retire Ukraine's debt. That is such an obvious statement, I am shocked I have to say it on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives, where I'm just glad we're still hanging our flag. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, let me just suggest this. It really is an unrealistic position for the United States to allow 4 million children with malaria to go untreated, to allow 350,000 deaths attributable to tuberculosis, to allow 13 million fewer children vaccinated, resulting in a possible 115,000 additional deaths, and a reduction of over 45% of humanitarian assistance to Sudan compared to 2023 levels. Very unrealistic, cruel, and unusual. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it's hard to believe what I am hearing. The gentlelady is saying, but there's malaria and tuberculosis and sickness and ailment all around the world. The gentlelady need look no further than her home state of California, where the human condition continues to decline. She would need to look no further than the major cities throughout our country that are under Democrat control. So maybe before we go solve all the world's problems, maybe before we function as the world's policeman and the world's piggy bank and the world's debt payer, we ought to focus on the issues that we have here in this country, and they are real. And frankly, too often, they metastasize from the gentlelady's home state. I reserve.
The gentleman has the only time.
I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment.
This amendment ensures that none of the funds appropriated in this act will be used to administer the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord is the unilateral surrender of the American economy, not for the sake of any sort of environmental improvement. It merely uses the veneer of climate change to execute a permission structure for some of the dirtiest countries in the world, for some of the greatest polluters, to be able to benefit at the expense of the United States. The Paris Climate Accord represents a circumstance where we were dead money at the table, putting up cash in exchange for economic development in faraway lands that would not benefit our people. This was a globalist enterprise. It was America last, and U.S. taxpayers should not be funding the Paris Climate Accord. That's the amendment, and I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I rise in strong opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, it is very clear from the science that the most existential crisis the world faces is from the growing climate crisis. Without intervention, our warming planet will have irreversible negative impacts on the United States and throughout the world. Climate change has resulted in lives upended in Texas and Florida, has led to extreme flooding in California and Vermont and throughout the country. And climate is not an issue that can be addressed by countries on their own. Air, water, pollution, they do not respect boundaries or sovereignty. The Paris Agreement, in recognition of this, brought all countries together around joint goals achieved by individual country plans. As proposed, this amendment would significantly damage the efforts of the United States to support developing countries as they pursue efforts to implement their commitments under the Paris Agreement. In addition, a wide range of U.S. climate and development programs would be impacted by this amendment, and it would seriously impede our ability to implement our obligations under the Paris Agreement. It would also prohibit the Department of State from participating in critical international climate negotiations. The climate crisis poses threats to the stability of countries, heightens social and political tensions, and adversely affects food prices and availability. And this is according to our own military. The need for foreign assistance will only increase if we do not address this significant driver of crises around the world. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I'd yield such time as you may consume to Chairman Diaz-Balart.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman from Florida because he raised some, I think, very important issues regarding the Paris Agreement. Look, even if it were true that global emissions will result in this global apocalypse in the distant future, the truth is that most developing countries are irrelevant in any climate model used to speculate about temperatures 100 years down the road. These countries have emissions that are nearly frankly undetectable when compared to the real culprits, which are China and other countries in Asia, which, by the way, are exempt, by the most part, from this climate accord. So while our bill already prohibits funds for the Green Climate Fund, the Clean Technology Fund, and other vehicles that could be used to carry out this Paris Agreement, I agree, and I thank the gentleman, that we should ensure that no parts of this wasteful spending, this really virtue signaling, is allowed to continue. So I thank the gentleman, and I strongly support his amendment. I yield back. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, many of our developing country allies have made it very clear that strengthening their ability to address climate change and the threat that it poses is an overriding national priority, and they are looking to the United States for support. I was in COP27 in Egypt a couple of years ago, and this is exactly the message that was sent. The FY24 House SFOPS bill willfully ignores the changing climate and its implications for so many other global challenges this bill is intended to address, including promoting food and water security, global health, the protection of tropical forests, and other vital natural resources, and social and political stability in strategically important regions. According to the World Bank, climate change could pull 132 million people back into extreme poverty by 2030 and could drive the internal migration of an additional 216 people by 2050. Every one of our districts have been challenged by severe drought, rainfall storms, and heat. We are continuing to spend more and more on humanitarian needs caused by these disasters, both domestically and abroad. We need to get ahead of these crises. Helping communities cope, especially those with the least means to do so, is both moral and smart. Why are we demonizing these programs and cutting ourselves off from valuable tools? These are not problems anyone can solve alone. We must work with others, which make cooperation and our multilateral tools work. That's what we need, such as the Clean Technology Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility. All of these and more are so important. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
It is neither moral nor smart to drive our nation deeper into debt, to jeopardize the future of this country so that we can engage in a globalist virtue signal. If this global agreement were real and benefiting our country, I think you'd find more people that were open-minded about a desire to ensure that we have an environment that is good for all of the inhabitants of the planet Earth. But unfortunately, that's not what the Paris Accord did. The Paris Accord required the United States to put up the cash, and then it gave the exemptions to China and India and the worst polluters on the planet Earth. So this isn't a question about whether or not we support the environment. This is a question about whether or not, under the veneer of environmentalism, we are going to kill American jobs, kill American manufacturing, make our country less competitive, drive down our GDP, while China and India play us like fools. We are better than that. The underlying bill does great work to ensure that our resources are directed to America's interests, not to these interests of these global institutions. I would encourage adoption of the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman Rios back. Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just one point I'd like to mention with regard to the climate emergency, which it is. You know, our young people deserve a future. They deserve a planet that is here for them. And I think we need to understand that the work we do in this House, or that we are not doing, really affects their future and their lives and their livelihoods. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The question is on